Hello everyone, in this video we are going to see an interesting SQL interview question, consecutive low stock period. The question is, write a SQL query to identify for each supplier and product the start date and the number of consecutive days during which the stock quantity remains below 50 for at least 2 consecutive days. We are given a supplier table which has 4 columns: supplier ID, product ID, supplier quantity and record date. And here is the sample records. If you see the first record, the supplier ID 1, the product ID is 1, the quantity is 60 and the date is 1/1. Since the quantity is greater than 50, we don't consider this record. If you see the second and the third record, it is of same supplier ID, same product, and both the quantities are less than 50 and it is a consecutive day. So we will populate this in our output. Here is our output with the supplier ID, product ID, start date is 1/2 and the number of consecutive days is 2. The fourth record has quantity greater than 50, so we don't consider this record. If you see the next two records, the quantity is less than 50 and it is a consecutive days. This is 1/5 and this is 1/6. So we will populate this in our output. This is for the supplier ID 1 and the product ID is 1 and the start date is 1/5 and the consecutive days are 2 consecutive days. That is 0/5 and 0/6. We have 2 in our output. If you see the next few records, it is more than 50. So we don't consider this. We have one record with 45. But on the next day, which is on 1/3, the quantity is more than 50. So we don't consider this in our output. The next few records are having the quantity greater than 50. If you see these 3 records, it is for the supplier ID 2 and the product ID is 1 and the quantity is less than 50 for 3 consecutive days. That is 1/1, 1/2 and 1/3. And on 1/4, the quantity is greater than 50. So for 3 consecutive days, the quantity is less than 50. So we will have this in our output for the supplier ID 2, product ID 1, the start date is 1/1 and the number of consecutive days is 3. And for the remaining records, the quantity is greater than 50. So we don't consider these records in our output. And here is our output. I hope the question is clear. Now let's get into the implementation. Here is our source table. Our source table is supplier inventory, which has 4 columns: supplier ID, product ID, stock quantity and record date. Here is our insert statements. And here is our select statement. Let me run this table. Here is our source data. As a first step, we are interested on records with only stock quantity less than 50, where stock quantity less than 50. Let me run this query. Here are the records with stock quantity less than 50. From this record, we have to find the number of consecutive days and the start date for each supplier ID and product ID. Here we don't need the stock quantity anymore because we have already done the filter condition. So we will select only supplier ID, product ID and the record date. Let me run this query. We got the supplier ID, product ID and the record date. As a next step, we have to find a group for the consecutive days. Let's see how we can achieve this. In order to do that, I am going to create this as a CTE. This CTE, I am going to name it as lower than 50 with lower than 50 as, let me select this table. Let me run this. In order to find a group for the consecutive days, I am going to use row number. Row number over partition by, I am going to partition based on supplier ID and the product ID, order by record date, this I am going to name it as RN. Let me run this once. For each supplier ID and product ID combination, we got the row number. So if you subtract the record date minus the row number, we will get the same date, right? That is January 2 minus 1 is January 1. January 3 minus 2 is also January 1. So if you see the next example, that is January 5 minus 3 is January 2. So the first two records is a consecutive days. Both will fall under the group of January 1. I hope it makes sense. Let me implement that. I am going to use date sub. What I am going to subtract? Record date minus row number. Record date, comma, interval. What is the interval? The interval is the row number. Let me copy this and give an alias, that is day. This I am going to name it as group. Let me run this once. So if you see here, each consecutive days got the same group. These two are consecutive days, both got the same group as January 1. The next two records is also consecutive, both got the same group, and this is not a consecutive, so it got a different group. And the last three records are consecutive, all three got the same group. I hope it makes sense. Now let me create this as a CTE. I am going to name this as group date as, let me select this table. Let me run this. The last step is we need to find the number of consecutive days. Let me implement that. I am going to select supplier ID, product ID, and we also need the start date of the consecutive days. So I am going to use min of record date. This I am going to name it as start date. I am going to group based on supplier ID, product ID and the group. Group by supplier ID, product ID and this group. Let me run this. We got the start date. We also need the number of consecutive days. I am going to use count star, comma, count star. This is the number of days. Let me run this once. We got the start date and the number of consecutive days. As a last step, we need only the records with 2 or more consecutive days. In order to do that, I am going to create this as a CTE. This I am going to name it as final. Let me select this table. From final. Now I need only the records with number of days greater than 0. Where number of days greater than 2. Now let me run this. Greater than or equal to 2. Greater than or equal to 2. Now let me run this. We got the desired result. For each supplier ID and product ID combination, we got the start date and the number of consecutive days. I hope you like this video and I am sure that you learned something new today. If you do like this video, please consider to subscribe and I will see you in yet another interesting SQL interview question. Thank you.